Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question. What is your honest stance on organic versus traditional / enhanced food products? Enhanced food, I guess natty versus enhanced food. Honestly, I think a lot of it's been shown pretty well to just be marketing hype. However, you really have to go case by case. I don't have specifics in mind immediately, but there are some foods out there, such as things like coffee beans, for example, that organic do seem to show some nutritional benefits. However, for many of them, there are no benefits other than a higher price tag. So in all honesty, if you're gonna shop organic, if you're gonna pay more for it, make sure that it's money well spent. However, I will be the first to admit that when I come across something on sale and I find an organic product for the same price as the non-organic, I tend to grab it. And it's because if I haven't necessarily researched that specific item and looked at any data and research to see if there's any benefit, because for most of them there isn't, but for some there is, I'm going to go ahead and just take the risk since it isn't costing me anything. However, if it is going to cost me more money, I'm not going to spend more money if I am not positive that there is an actual direct health benefit. It's not worth spending money for something you're unsure of. So that's the way I personally approach it. That's my opinion on it. And there have been a few reports done to where they've done broad sweeping things to find out which items as a whole tend to have some sort of benefit and which ones don't. There's some data compiled on that was done a couple years ago. And they did find that the majority there isn't a benefit. But there is a sizable number of items that do. So you really got to look at those sort of reports and go case by case basis. But as a general rule, if you catch them on sale or they're in the same price range or very, very close, I'll tend to go ahead and grab the organic as long as it's not costing me anything extra. All right, next question. Do Olympic lifts have any form of carryover to power lifts, and where should you implement them in your routine? You know, in all honesty, I think most Olympic lifts are useful for people who Olympic lift. I'm not saying there isn't some carryover. Everything can carry over to your power lifts and your performance, but is it necessarily an effective or an efficient use of your time as a power lifter to learn the technique on power lifts that are only going to give you small carryover to your big lifts? Now, we could argue that things like power cleans could carry over to a lot of lifts, and they do. Power cleans are probably the one Olympic lift that I wouldn't put in this other category, but everything else is a highly technical lift. And while it might improve your overall strength, it isn't going to improve as much as just doing the basic power lifts and some of their very, very close accessories. It's not going to be as an effective use of your time in increasing them. So they can, just like in theory, for a lot of raw benchers, doing tons of tricep extensions might improve your bench press. Wouldn't be the most effective way to improve your pause bench for a completely raw bencher though. And it's the same with some of the Olympic lifts when you look at it from that perspective. They might help, but they're probably not going to be an efficient use of your time if you're adding them purely for the purpose of improving your power lifts. It's just not a good use of your time and energy. All right, next question. You said in your last Q&A that as a novice, if you were getting DOMs in your lower back from deadlifts, you may have to reassess your form, which is true. I did say that. What about for an intermediate deadlifter? I'm currently running 5-3-1 for my deadlift and pulling around 200 kilograms mark, and I'll place that as well into intermediate, for a 1 rep max. However, I have started getting light DOMs in my lower back. It takes around 2 days to recover. This mainly happens after the volume work, which I do on a separate day. Yeah, I would be leery of lower back DOMs. If you're getting lower back DOMs, it may not be a technique issue because you're only getting it on the volume work. It could be some technique degrading near the end of your volume work, or it could simply be a matter of you're not recovering from the workload enough in your spinal erectors. If that's the case, what I might consider doing if you're worried about the DOMs, or you don't want to deal with the DOMs, take one set out. Back your workload on that high volume day down just a bit to where your lower back isn't getting DOMs. There's no point in walking around that way. You may not be getting any real benefit to make it worth that at that point. And it could be the fact that as you are getting fatigued, you could be experiencing some form degradation that is putting unnecessary stress on your lower back, and that could be the cause of it also. And so just by reducing that volume just slightly, you're able to keep the sets in that you're able to maintain better form on. So your solution there is overall just to reduce that volume slightly, unless you're comfortable with it. If you don't mind a little bit of DOMs and you think you might be benefiting from the extra volume you're doing that day, you don't feel personally, because as an intermediate lifter, you've got some experience under your belt, you don't feel like it's causing an injury, it's not really a pain that's really bothering you or annoying you, then you may want to just put up with it and keep doing it though. So that's what you really have to weigh out personally. All right, next question. Adipowers or other squat shoes versus Vibrams versus Chuck Taylors. When you guys have seen me squat in all three of those, by the way, over time. Of these three, which do you believe is the most superior for squatting / deadlifting in your personal experience? So again, we're going to come to my personal experience. This isn't about everyone because these are very, very individual. I personally prefer the Vibrams for deadlifting. Not to say that Chucks aren't fantastic for deadlifting, but if you're trying to just get a small edge, the Vibrams put you a fraction of an inch closer to the floor. You might get 1 more kilo on your deadlift. And I happen to just like them. I find them comfortable. The Adipowers, which I do use for squat, I prefer for squatting. I feel like I can squat deeper, easier, and my hips open up better when I do them. However, I'm also a high bar squatter. Someone who is a low bar squatter built differently than me might not experience that. They might find that the Chucks give them the best leverages and the best heel drive and everything else coming out of the bottom. So it's going to depend upon your individual style and your individual structure. But I can say that me personally, I can squat deeper more easily in the Adipowers than the other two. I also prefer obviously the Vibrams and meets, because you guys notice at competition I deadlift in Vibrams and I squat in Adipowers. But are Chucks still suitable? If I had to, could I compete in Chucks? Absolutely. Just wouldn't be my first choice. I could still do probably pretty close to as well, if not just as well with them. I just find that there are little small advantages using those other shoes for me personally, just based upon my structure and style. All right, next question. When should a lifter start using a belt? What are the benefits of using a belt? What are the benefits of not using one? Thanks. This isn't something I can cover in detail in a Q&A. You should start using a belt when you start preparing for a competition that you're going to wear a belt in. I generally don't recommend most non-competitors even bother with belts. However, for some physique competitors or models, people who are going to do that, this is anecdote by the way, this is just anecdote based on observation over the years and some basic logic. It seems to me that belts can reduce the amount of hypertrophy around your core and your waistline. It could give you a slightly smaller waist to do your heavy training with a good belt on. And in that case, it might keep your waistline slightly smaller, and if you're making a living off of your aesthetics, or you're competing in bodybuilding or men's physique or something like that, and you're wanting to keep your waistline just a hair smaller, it might be worth your trouble to do so. Even if it turns out that it doesn't seem to do that, there's a chance that it does. It's not costing you much. It might be a good idea. So I recommend it for that, even though it's not completely proven to be the case, just because it's adding no real risk, and it's giving you at least some chance of having a slightly smaller waist, which could be important to you in that situation. Now, the benefits to training without a belt: a stronger core, more stability in your core that will carry over when you put the belt on in actual competition. And for field athletes who are going to take hits, they're going to be in contact sports, I recommend not training with a belt at all. For that reason, a stronger, more stable core. All right, next question. When recommending an exercise for the long head of the triceps, why do you recommend skullcrushers behind the head as opposed to overhead tricep extensions? Yeah, you guys know in all my tutorials and even examples I've given of me training, I do this. I recommend the skullcrushers while laying down with extension of the shoulder to recruit the long head and get that stretch reflex in it, as opposed to the behind the head extensions, which are a little more targeted of the long head. Now, the reason I recommend that is just better overall tricep development. I feel like the skullcrushers will give better overall tricep development due to better stimulation while still giving a heavy recruitment of the long head. It's a nice balanced exercise as opposed to being forced to use a lighter weight to put more focus on directly on the long head with the behind the head extension. I just feel it's better to try to bring up the overall tricep. However, That is a personal bias on my part, as someone who does struggle with really filling out their full triceps just due to my own genetics and insertions. My triceps have never really looked that big. Even when they're really strong, and you guys have seen me rip out 130, 135 pounds for sets of 10 on skullcrushers and things, after doing closed grip presses, but I still don't have massive triceps. And it's the same even when I was doing tons of push downs and things. So for me, since I struggle to fill out my whole tricep, I kind of prefer to use exercises that develop the whole tricep completely, as opposed to trying to just focus on one lagging head. And that tends to carry over into my general recommendations. Now, I might make an exception to that rule for someone whose goals are aesthetic, which isn't the majority of the people that I try to work with or reach out to. But if that happens to be someone and that really is a problem, their long head is truly lagging badly, and they compete in some sort of physique competition or are a fitness model or something, in that situation might be the one time I might recommend that people incorporate the behind the head work for that. But for the general lifters, I wouldn't bother. All right, next question. How safe is a closed grip bench press in the long run? Well, me personally, I get less strain on my shoulder doing it. I never feel strain in my shoulders when I do it. That's the reason I personally close grip. There are a lot of long-term lifters who feel the same way. And when I compare over what I've seen over the last couple of decades among very experienced lifters, the guys who bench narrower tend to have fewer rotator cuff and shoulder issues. They tend to need fewer surgeries to repair their shoulders, even when bench pressing very, very heavy guys who are bench pressing 400, 500 or more raw. So I generally recommend the closed grip. It is overall safer, and I know a lot of very serious lifters who agree, guys like Paul Carter, guys like KK, a lot of guys out there closed grip for that reason. All right, next question. Why do you prefer overhead press over bench press for athletes? Very simple. It carries over better into actual sports. When you punch someone, are you punching them like this, or is there more of an upward angle when you punch in any sort of contact sport? There tends to be more of an upward angle. It's going to do more of that. With a bench press, you're always training to do a press with your back pressed against something. How many sports do you get to do that in? Very little, and there's very little room for you to add true leg drive. You could go from strict presses to push presses, or even just push presses with just a little bit of English in them, not even a true push press, very easily in overhead pressing, to learn to use your lower body to assist with the press, which is going to carry over better onto the field in any sort of contact sport or any sport in general, to where you need some sort of pressing power. Whether it's football or MMA or anything to where you're hitting someone in full contact, or whether it's even something like baseball to where you're throwing a ball and you need some leg drive in there with the same muscles that are used in a press to get a little more speed and power. So it overall carries over better due to the slightly upward angle and to the fact that you are using your whole core and possibly your legs and some leg drive in the lift also, which the bench press isn't training. It's going to carry over better to sports. So hopefully that clarifies that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.